from the Bedrock blog, and I'm here with Joel Clark for another episode of Wuxia Workshop. And today we're talking about two movies that I think could not be more different within the martial arts genre. We're talking about My Young Auntie, which is a film that stars Kara Hui, and she plays a young woman named Dainan who marries her master. She's basically a servant in order to protect his assets against a scheming brother. And she's supposed to take them to Guangzhou, where she's going to transfer them to his nephew. And there she develops a rivalry with the nephew's son, Charlie, and she dips her toes into Western culture. And it's kind of a golden age of Hollywood type film, except for when the scheming brother returns to steal the Yu family deed. And that forces Charlie and Dainan, who have had this rivalry, to work together to get it back. And the other movie is Web of Death, and that's directed by Chor Yuen. And this film is the clans of the martial world fight for possession of the five-venom spider, and a tale of intrigue, love, betrayal, and a martial world blinded by its own righteousness. It basically, the centerpiece of this movie is the five-venom spider and just how spectacular it is, I would say. There's also, it also draws heavily on Legend of Condor Heroes and Heaven Sword Dragon Saber, so you kind of, if you're familiar with those stories, you'll just see traces of the plot lines completely retooled for the purposes of telling a story that feels more like a Gulong story than a Louis Cha story. But it's a very interesting film, and it's a little bit. Would you say it's gonzo? Would you describe it as gonzo, or does it not quite hit that level?
Oh, it hits gonzo.
Okay.
And I'm gonna go with the RPG pundits' pretty excellent breakdown of what gonzo meant, in that it has an internal consistency, but within that consistency, it does the most insane and fantastic things that it can. I would like to point out with these two movies to our listeners, I greatly enjoyed and highly recommend both of them. They're both on Amazon Prime. They're worth your time. Just too long, don't read. Watch these movies. They're amazing. We should definitely start with Web of Death.
Okay.
So,
but between,
I want to tell you all my thoughts on it. It's so cool.
Okay, you talk. I just have to adjust something that's to my left, so I will appear off camera. But just keep talking.
I was going to talk anyway. I was watching you. Anyway, so Web of Death is fantastic, guys. First of all, it's extremely colorful. The set design and the costuming is fantastic. Remember Captain Fistamancer from last time? What if he had his own movie and everyone was dressed like him? It's really, it's visually just stunning. It looks really, really good. And it also has a lot of really interesting camera angles and these wonderful wide-angle lens shots of these beautifully designed sets with all these traps, and there's liquid elements, and it's really... Oh man, it looks so good, and sorry. Go on.
I was just gonna say that's a Chor Yuen thing. Chor Yuen's hallmark is he makes really, really good-looking movies. In fact, this is actually a later Chor Yuen movie, and if you look at the earlier ones, a lot of them are even better. Like because he has a slightly different style in his earlier films. At some point, the name is a little bit off-putting to some people, but I think we should do a movie called Intimate Confessions of a Chinese Courtesan at some point, because that's I know it sounds salacious, it sounds very salacious, but it's one of his most beautiful movies that he's ever made. Like you will know when you see in the first, you see that first scene and you realize, oh my god, this is why Chor Yuen's films look so amazing, and it's probably the best example in my mind of his ability to just make things on screen look good. But I'm sorry, go on. You were talking about the sets.
It's not even just the visuals. Like, the sound design in this caught me off guard with just how, first of all, it's unusual. Like, for instance, every time that spider comes on, they get the spider in this little, kind of lantern-looking thing, and every time they're near it, there's this sort of, alarm sound. It's almost like a sci-fi sound effect that's really unnerving. Like, you can tell something horrible is in that lantern, and there is. Oh my god. That spider, it's... you know what? Actually, a lot of times, watching this, I was reminded of Sinbad the Sailor and, Jason and the Argonauts and movies like that. It really had that kind of fantastic vibe to it. We haven't done a lot of wuxia films that have that kind of I mean, this had a magical spider in it, and not just a little magical. This thing roared like a lion and brought the martial world to its knees with its superpowers.
And it's interesting too because it's a 1976 film, and I mean there are other martial arts movies like that in this period, but like I tend to associate that sort of more fantastic Shaw Brothers wuxia with the early 80s. Do you know what I mean? This is kind of early on for that style of you know. I mean the spider is just it's beyond spectacular. You know, it
really
takes
is.
It's like the peacock weapon in Magic Blade times 1,000. Do you know what I mean? It's a really cool concept. You have to use your imagination a little bit because of the way that they have the spider attacking people. But I think it works. I think it works because that somehow makes it a little bit more horrifying.
There's a reality to it that, again, I wasn't really prepared for. There's a lot of this movie that caught me off guard in a good way. Because at one point, they do have, like, martial artists, full-grown adults fighting this thing, and it's, like, legit a tarantula that's on set.
Yeah. And
they even have it, like, rear up and everything, but they, like I said, they put, like, lion roar sound effects on it, and there's all this, like, beautiful, like, well, it's nasty, scary-looking webbing stuff that they use. And when people die because of it, like, they shrivel up in this horrifying way, and they, like, they blacken their faces, like they're all necrotic. It's really just fantastic. And you combine that with the set design and the sound design and just the really interesting. They make really good cuts during the fight scenes.
Yeah,
and it's wonderful. It's wonderfully put together.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is one of the. This movie surprised me so much when I saw it because I just was not expecting a movie called Web of Death to do what this film did. You know, I mean, I was expecting something dark, but I was blown away. Number one, by that opening scene where you have the five Venom clan in their headquarters, and they have that meeting room that they all take different tunnels to their respective seats. So it's like the sub chiefs just kind of all. It was just so glorious and.
Yes, and as soon as that scene started, I was like, I'm in. I'm all in.
Yeah.
There's a glowing spider, like, altar in the middle of them, and it's this huge, like, antechamber. They come in like the final bosses of a video game. It's amazing. The one guy's got a centipede made of iron that he fights with?
Yeah, it's like a shield that's like a centipede, but it's like a... I don't know what you would call it because it goes on his arm like a shield, but he kind of uses it like a weapon. So it's a really cool device. And what I also liked about this is again the you know, there's acid pits and all kinds of traps and exploded, you know, and like there's a series of stones they have to walk across over, like I think an acid pit or boiling water or something. And this is one of the movies I was thinking of when I was talking about wuxia dungeons. You know, like this is like this has and there's the tomb also, the tomb that has all those traps. I mean, there are more dungeons in this than you would see in a standard fantasy movie for sure. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, like that tomb is straight out of Gygax's nightmares. Because it's like you open it up, and then this all happens in the movie that they point out. This is like straight up an actual Gygaxian dungeon. A bunch of martial sects open it up to steal the magic spider, and they walk in, and a trap immediately, like this iron ring comes down and kills 3 of them. So you get past that, and the floor falls out and sprays them in acid. There's a bunch of skeletons there. And that's the point when the wise ones leave, and then the heroes come in, and they get through a bunch of other traps. It's wonderful.
And there's a puzzle too. There's like a little bit of a puzzle to the trap. It's really clever. You know, and also, I love the intrigue going on within the Venom clan because the villain is played by Lolier, who I don't know if you've picked up on him yet, but he's sort of like Vincent Price is maybe the wrong person to compare him to, but he's one of these guys who plays he's like an Anthony Hopkins type or something. He plays really good villains. You know, he's just very, very gifted in this respect, and his bone structure in his face just really supports him as a villainous character. I remember watching him in a lot of his earlier roles where he's more heroic, and you almost tend not to notice him quite as much. But then when you see him in these villain roles, he's just got this massive presence. And in this one, he plays Lu Shen, who's who's an interesting bad guy because he's kind of like a little kid. Do you know what I mean? He's he's sort of like the number 2 sub chief, it seems, in this Venom clan, and he's plotting to take control of the clan, and he wants to gain use of their spider, which their sect isn't supposed to use. Like, there's a decree that they're only supposed to use it in emergencies. And the current clan chief is sort of abiding by the declarations of their ancestors, and so he has to overthrow him. And in order to do that, he needs to get the spider. And it's just a really cool, sort of, setup for an internal struggle within a martial clan.
It is really good. Also, there's 2 things I want to point out that struck me as kind of things that are unique to wuxia. Like, I don't see this a lot. First of all, the spider, there is no explanation for that spider. It's just a thing. It's like, yeah, we have this. That's it. They're not like, 10,000 years ago. Like, they don't tell us the origin of the spider.
Yeah.
They just have it. Moving on. That's very wuxia. I love that we don't get, like, they don't baby you as an audience. They're like, look, man, there's magical Chiron and stuff. Just deal with it. It's great. I love it.
Well, and I will say, sometimes in the books there will be further explanation. Like in Return of Condor Heroes, they have these spiders that are, I think they're like rainbow snow spiders or something. And they do explain where they come from, and that they're from Tibet, and they're this thing. I don't know what this spider is inspired by, so I'm not sure exactly, what the source material it's drawn from, if there is source material, what the explanation might be. But I'm sorry, go on.
Well, again, I was kind of reminded of Jason and the Argonauts. I don't think they explain, like, the Colossus in Jason and the Argonauts. I think it's just there. They're like, oh, there's a Colossus on the side. What? Oh, God! It's kind of the same thing here. The second thing was, you were talking about the head of the sect. I like that character a lot. That's another kind of genuinely wuxia thing where he's a guy that's a good father, and he seems like a kind-hearted person, but also he's a super powerful villain in charge of an evil martial arts sect that have a demon spider. So character. Yeah,
so when he needs to be tough against the Hu Hua character, the Fei Ying Zhang, he is. Do you know what I mean? He comes to visit him, and in the moment that Fei Ying is not polite, they combat breaks out. But he's basically kind of a good guy. Like, he's not, he's definitely much better than all the other members of the clan. Like, he's got that wife that's plotting against him and sleeping with Lu Shen, and and all of his sub chiefs are plotting against him, I think. Basically he and his daughter are the only 2 really nice people in the sect. And again, these are obviously based on characters from Heaven Sword Dragon Saber, which is a somewhat similar type of situation where the Wu Dang hero gets caught up in a romance with a character from one of the bad sects, and I think in Heaven Sword Dragon Saber, she, like, it's quite similar. She accidentally poisons one of his sworn brothers or one of his brothers, and then she has an escort company send him to Wudang, but there are problems along the way, and he ends up being crippled. And in Heaven Sword Dragon Saber, the outcome is a lot more. Well, I guess it's actually pretty tragic here too, but it's different because they have a child, and the child is the main character of the story. So so what this movie does is it basically takes, like, the opening, like the beginning of Heaven Sword Dragon Saber, and before the main character's even like really an adult, and kind of uses a lot of that material. Though again, if you read Heaven Sword Dragon Saber, it's not going to be anything like this movie. It's so, but I think that I really do like the evil clan in this, and I love the idea that the Wu Dang clan and all the righteous clans at the end, they're so focused on their own sense of righteousness that they completely miss the plot that's being spun around them. You know what I mean? It's and then they end up literally encased in this web of death, and they have to rely on the daughter of the evil clan to help save them.
Doing the actual heroic thing.
Yeah.
because she has like there's something about the way her and her father's blood works that can nullify the web's powers, but it kills them.
Yeah.
So spoilers.
They set everything up perfectly. There's a lot of these stories. They'll lay down rules that become important to the tale later on. So in this one, it's my blood can nullify the spider, but if I get a wound to release the blood, my blood will not stop flowing, so I'll die. And there's the other one where the head of Wudang says to the Yu Ha's character, you can do anything you want, but don't be a friend to a member of the Venom clan, And I think in the Prime version we watched, they were called the Spider Clan. So there are some differences in subtitles and overdubs and stuff. This is a movie you could watch it on Prime with the dubs, and it's fine. I definitely think it benefits more from the subtitles with the original audio tracks if you can get it on Blu-ray, which again I recommend because the Blu-ray is gorgeous.
This would be a movie that looked great on Blu-ray. I'm a little sad that I didn't have an HD version.
This looked good on Blu-ray. Intimate Confessions of Chinese Courtesan also very good on Blu-ray. Chor Yuen movies are ones like I don't necessarily need to see a Cheng Che film in HD, but a Chor Yuen movie I would like to see in Blu-ray if I can. If it's been restored and everything.
So rich, there's a lot to appreciate visually in this movie. But really, I was entertained for every second of watching it. It really is a great movie.
No, it's just like a fun sort of, I don't know how to put it. It's just a fun, adventurous, dark film, and it gets into horror.
It's fun in a fantastic way. I don't see a lot of movies like this anymore. Again, that comparison to Jason and the Argonauts, I think is the strongest one, where there's this sense of almost mythical whimsy to it with all the crazy stuff that happens that you just don't get that in a lot of modern films. Modern films take themselves so seriously, and everything's so serious and dour. And this one, it's magic spider, acid pits, go.
And I think the other thing about this one is Chor Yuen sort of has a reputation for making confusing films because he has so many characters and they're all doing so many things. And this film, it's pretty simple. It's not that confusing compared to his other movies. It's fairly easy to follow. And another thing I liked about it, I really liked Ching Li as Hong Susu. Oftentimes you see her playing more supporting roles. Like the woman playing the Gu Zheng in the pavilion, or there'll be important characters, and she's even, she does play, top bill characters too. But this just seemed like I felt like I really noticed her performance more in this movie than in a lot of other movies.
Really good performance this time. Let me see. Really, there were a lot of good actors in this one. I don't think there was one actor where I was like, oh, they weren't interesting. Really, all of them pretty much fit it to the hilt.
Well, Lily Lee as the junior disciple that's in love with the Yuhua character was also really great, and I think like I said, Lolier really stands out. We even got you probably don't notice him, but Norman Xu appears in the film too, but he's a fairly minor role. And Gu Feng plays the I think the leader of Shaolin, and there's an abbess. I don't know who played her, but she was really impressive as well. The abbess who cuts off her arm with the fly whisk.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it's just it's just a really enjoyable film.
Classic Wuxia style. Some of the most interesting characters show up in the last scene. So, because this is when the whole martial world gathers. So there's a lot of interesting, colorful characters that come in, and they only get they're important to the plot. They're basically central to it, but they're only there for this little sliver of the movie. That's like recurring thing. Actually, our second movie does that too. Well,
and we should probably get into that because we are in a slightly more limited time frame today. But
it's going to be speed reviews today.
Well, we'll also get into the mechanics too after. But My Young Auntie, which is a 1981 film directed by Lau Kar-leung, and it stars Kara Hui. And it also stars Zhao Ho as the Charlie character, and Johnny Wang plays the villain. He's not a villain like the guy in the last movie, but he's the scheming brother who's trying to steal the property in this one. And you get some appearances from Gordon Liu, and Lau Kar-leung himself also has a pretty big role in the movie. So I don't know. First, I want to get what did you think of this film? Because I got to say before we start on it, this movie is not a standard martial arts film. It's really more of like a golden age of Hollywood is the best way I can describe it. It's kind of a slice of life type film in a lot of ways. And
man, it caught me off guard because it's got the same kind of like energy that something like Singing in the Rain or one of those like sort of golden age of Hollywood musical kind of thing has. It's not a musical, but it is a martial arts movie. But like you're right, it's very not traditional. There was a lot in this movie that was something I've never seen before in martial arts movies. Actually, I guess I've seen them in stuff like Rush Hour, where there's kind of an East meets West vibe. But it's I think it's 100% Chinese actors, and like it's got a lot of energy. It's really funny, which I wasn't prepared for. Like there's a lot of cultural stuff, like Chinese cultural stuff that meets like some modern Western cultural stuff, and it's really they make a genuinely funny blend of those things, how they interact.
And isn't it interesting too that they don't seem to really pick sides in the disguise? Like they, it seems like he's kind of there's sort of like a lot of the humor and a lot of the character drama revolves around this sort of conflict between her being more rural and traditional and the Charlie character being, like more from Hong Kong or something and educated in a Western system and importing all these fashionable Western ideas and that's where a lot of their clashes come from. But over the course of the movie, he maybe becomes a little bit more traditional, and she becomes a little bit more, a little bit more fashionable. And
like,
so,
which she becomes Susie, you mean?
Yeah. Well, we can talk about that. That's a whole other part of the film.
Like Susie, yeah.
but it's I don't know. It's just like a real charming movie. It's
charming.
I
laughed so much watching this movie, and that made it even more it hit me even more unexpectedly whenever they started fighting, because the fighting initially, like in the first part of the movie, is pretty decent. There's some really interesting like acrobatics, but as they wind up to the climax of the movie, it's some of the most visually impressive fighting I've ever seen in a martial arts movie. It's like a rival of any of the other ones that we've seen. So like it's got all these surprising elements. I was basically on the edge of my seat the whole time I watched this. I unfortunately had to watch it in like half an hour to 45-minute segments because of my schedule. But I was like biting my teeth, waiting to be able to watch it again each time. Like it's really good.
Yeah, no, I think it's an amazing movie. This is one of my favorites to watch, and also I believe she won an award for it. I believe she won a Hong Kong Film Award for her performance in this one. And
she's a fantastic actress, and she does a really good job in this movie. And physically, like the stuff she's able to pull off is mind-blowing. Really good stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and everybody's really good. Like that's the thing. Like Lau Kar Leung is, obviously excellent. But Zhao Ho is also, very good. And Johnny Wang is his usual impressive self. He plays a slightly different character here. Interestingly enough, you get Gordon Liu, and he does some martial arts, but he's kind of here more for comedy. He was the one wearing he had kind of a funny wig, it seemed, in the not a wig but a hairpiece of some kind that was a little bit Elvis-like or something. He played James. Remember James and Robert? But yeah, I think one of the fascinating things about her character in the movie is she's supposed to be very young. She's like Charlie's age, who's basically kind of like a college student, I think. But she's been elevated in the family because she married this senior brother, and so she's the auntie of the Lau Kar Leung character, who's supposed to be like in his 50s or something. And so she's sort of she's adopting the mannerisms of like an elder, and she does this. It's just she does a very convincing job of being someone who believes they're an elder in the family, even though they really aren't, and is behaving that way. But then she occasionally has these dips back into sort of, where you recognize, oh, she's just sort of assuming this role, but she really is like young, like Charlie, and occasionally it rises to the surface. But I don't know. Well, first off, what did you think of the relationship between those two characters in general?
Those two, like, oh man, that was one of those. This happens in very few media where they have something that is a really good and interesting premise, and it's well set up, and then you get to see basically every single way you could take that within the work.
Yep.
It's very rare that I see that, but that's what I think about that. It was like, it's a really fun premise. You've got two very different people. Like you said, one's more like they're about the same age, but like one's more traditional, one's more modern, and they're in this interesting position where one is technically like a much higher senior than the other because of this loophole of marriage and inheritance. So, and they start out as rivals, and like even just the meeting where they first get together, and they're like fighting in the family shrine and all this destructive stuff. And, like, you could tell she's like, I don't want to fight in here. And he's just, like, throwing the headstones at her. Everything about that was great. And it set up a great rivalry. And then as the movie goes on, they learn to respect one another. And they work together for the good of the family. And they both learn from each other. And it's fully realized. And everything about it is fun and unique and well presented. And then furthermore, it's well acted, both physically and like emotionally from the actors. So it's the centerpiece of this movie, and it really is a great centerpiece to a great movie.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that the what's interesting too is I think in a typical movie, the Charlie character would have been kind of like antagonistic through the whole film. Like he would have been the character who the audience is supposed to not like. You know, he's like the character of the family that you're supposed to have some resentment to. And
you would think it would be demonizing him, because this is still a Chinese movie we're talking about, and you know, looking at trendy Western values corrupting traditional values, that's a pretty easy target to make the bad guy. But he's not the bad guy. The bad guy is someone who's actually being a bad person and trying to steal part of the family inheritance that's not his and squander it.
Yep.
So you get to see him as more of a balanced character, which makes him a little more mischievous and a lot more fun.
And I think balance is a big part of what Lau Kar-leung does. He always does seem to have this nice balance of tone, this nice balance of sort of the male and the female, the yin and the yang, even a balanced perspective in a lot of ways. And I think here it just all comes together like magically. Because it's this kind of movie where you think back on it and you're like, well, what did I just see? Because I don't think I saw, like, I know I saw martial arts, but I don't feel like I just watched a kung fu movie. But the kung fu was like amazing. But all I keep thinking about is like that ballroom scene for some reason. Like the ballroom scene is the scene that always stands out in my mind. And it's just so basically like one of the big moments in the film is when he convinces her to go to this masquerade ball with him, where his plan is to embarrass her because she's been bringing back the old family rules and the orthodox etiquette, and he's very angry about this. So he wants to embarrass her to get back at her, and he knows that she can't do Western style dancing because she does, like that's sort of a big point in the movie where they, she's more accustomed to traditional music and dance. And he's very familiar with these new Western styles of dance, and so they want to embarrass her as somebody who's not as sophisticated as them. But the bad guy exploits that masquerade ball to send his henchmen in there to mess with them, and then eventually get them put in jail on trumped up opium charges, all with the aim of getting the uncle, the Lau Kar-leung character, out of the house so they can go in and steal the deed. And it's all done very cleverly because you don't even notice the plot moving. You feel like it's not, and then before you realize it, the plot has moved.
Significantly. Like that, it takes even the audience by surprise. Very well made, very very well put together.
And what I like about it is, again, when I think of Lau Kar-leung, I think he does a lot of really good work around like just having things happen at like locations for an extended period of time. And I think a lot of movies, when they do that, they have a hard time advancing the plot because a lot of times plot is kind of tied not just to the drama between the characters, but physical movement and shifting between scenes. And he manages to just kind of do it and it leads to all these funny moments. Like, the ballroom scene is amazingly funny, and the scene with the two police officers, the tall guy and the short guy, and it's kind of like classics. It's like a classic visual gag where this tall guy comes forward and says he's like the boss, and then the camera pans down and there's this shorter guy who says, no, I'm the boss, and it's just funny. And you don't need to understand the original language to see the humor in it instantly.
And the humor translates really well to Western audience because, like I was saying, I was laughing the whole time. Like, for example, it's a masquerade, and it's like kind of a costume party, and he is dressed up as Robin Hood, complete with his tiny knife. Which, when the fighting breaks out, all the bad guys using swords, he insists on using his stupid little knife because it's authentic to the costume. And she just completely eschews the whole thing right away and gets a Chinese straight sword out, what they call the Jian, and whoops some serious behind with it. And another amazing fight scene, which, again, sort of comes out of nowhere. You're in the middle of watching this comedic scene of her blundering through a ballroom, and then all of a sudden, it's one of the most impressive sword fights you've ever seen. It's incredible balance.
That is a really great sword scene, and I like the scene too when the two of them team up and decide to sneak out of the house to go to the uncle's, and they both dress up as heroes, but heroes of very different types. She basically dresses up as a wuxia hero, and he dresses up as like a war hero. Do you know what I mean? Like
he's got the helmet and everything.
Yeah, he's got like a helmet, and the helmet becomes important because if he didn't have that helmet on, he would have been speared in the head by the trap. Then they go to the uncle's house, and it's trapped up the wazoo. There's like traps everywhere, and I mean lethal traps. Like there's spear traps, there's bear traps, there's like spiked things that sort of fling out of the ground and impale you. There's a straw dummy that has all these swords that come out of it. This guy means business. And so they go there, they fight, she gets trapped there basically, and he has to go get the other uncles. The other uncles, who are all old, like part of the comedy is all of the uncles are they obviously were good at kung fu, but they're too old now, and they have like heart problems and stuff. So it's like hard for them to go and storm the scheming uncle's estate. And the scheming uncle, his whole situation is he doesn't have any descendants. He doesn't have any children, so he has like a godson that he's adopted who he wants to transfer all of his wealth to. And he's an interesting character. Number one, it's Johnny Wang, who's really good at playing these tough bad guys that you believe can kick the crap out of the hero, and who looks like they don't give a damn. But this came up in the previous podcast, and I didn't pick up on this, but I know somebody else brought it up, and I think I even dismissed the thought when it first came up. But I think he is supposed to be gay, that character. I'm not sure.
But they insult him and say that at one point. It seems to get under his skin. So that's kind of the vibe I got, too, where it was like, there's probably a little bit more going on with this guy than we see on scene.
Because when the godson is imperiled, when he's like threatening the groin of the god, like obviously he might be concerned about his descendants because that godson is the person who's going to carry on the family line, I suppose. But he also maybe was concerned because that's not actually, maybe it's not really his godson. Do you know what I mean? Maybe
there's some sinister depth to that relationship.
And
maybe. If so, it's pretty subtle. Like it is that one insult in that one scene, and even in that scene where his genitals are being threatened, they specifically call out the whole lineage and eunuch thing.
Yeah.
So I mean, like that's if that's misdirection, that's impressive misdirection.
Well, and like I said, I believe I sort of didn't buy the argument when somebody first said it on the podcast, but watching it this time, I was kind of like, I think that is supposed to be the case. Something about the character, it just seemed like it was like maybe that's what they were going for. And also, I don't think that we ever see him like with a wife or anything like that. Do you know what I mean?
No, there's no romantic, like nothing like that with any kind of female character. He is surrounded by a lot of gorgeous shirtless men, though.
Yeah. He's got the guy who's got like a jacket that's open in the front, and he's really like got like very well developed muscles, and his whole thing is he's got like the iron shirt or whatever, like you can't, like when you stab him it doesn't penetrate his skin, and so it seems kind of fitting. Also, I think like the fact that this guy, like, I suppose he could just be, you know, like maybe he can't have children of his own for some reason. Maybe there's something physically going on there. But he seems like the kind of guy who would at least have tried. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? And he'd at least have like a wife around. Do you know what I mean? Like he seems like he gets all the things that he wants in the world. So I believe there are maybe enough details for us to draw that conclusion with the character. But what I like about the overall conflict is it's not a particularly bloody affair. It's
I don't even know if anybody dies in this movie. Like it's pretty. Even the main villain, when he gets his ass kicked, doesn't die. He just loses.
Yeah, and he kind of comes around. Like he isn't resounding, but you see him nodding his head when she says you did wrong. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like
I did wrong.
Huh?
He is. He's like, yeah, I did do wrong. Just kind of accepts it.
So it kind of has this nice closure to it, and it's, I don't know, it's not that, you know, obviously I love movies where people are getting cut in half and all this stuff, but it's also nice that Lau Kar-leung is capable of making, you know, these great movies like this that don't always have those things. Do you know what I mean? You know, he can make a really good movie where, you know, this is something that you could probably show, like, you know, 8-year-olds, and it wouldn't. I don't think there was anything in here that would be too upsetting for them.
No, this is like it's. I don't even know if it's PG. Like, it really is that, like, low key. There's really not any violence. All the violence is pretty slapstick. No one gets seriously injured or mutilated or killed. There's not any. I mean, there's no nudity. There's not even any strong, overtly romantic things that happen in it at all. So, like, yeah, I could probably show this to my kids, and they just enjoy the silliness.
In fact, yeah, I would say that I think the reason I like this movie is it reminds me a lot of the kinds of films I watched as a kid. Because when I was a kid, you know, I was born in '76, so a lot of the movies I watched as a kid were the things that my parents were familiar with from that golden age of Hollywood period. Do you know what I mean? Like that was, you know, that was the stuff that they would tend to show us. So so it just had that kind of warmth and charm, and even though, like you said, it's not a musical, but there's a musical quality to a lot of this movie.
There really is.
Yeah, and there is one scene where Charlie pretends to sing while Gordon Liu and his and Robert are playing in the background. But there even without it being a musical, there's a lot of, you know, dance numbers, and, you know, there is music throughout the film, and it just has that vibe. And there's the whole scene in the city when she goes and buys the dress. You know, it's just kind of like a Marilyn Monroe moment or something. You know, it's just
yes, it was a moment that could have had Mickey Rooney walk on stage as the bumbling Western salesman, and it would have been 100% believable.
Yeah,
you know, like, you're talking about golden age of Hollywood stuff. Yeah, that was a very golden age scene.
Well, and what I liked about the setup of that is she's trying to fight, and she's not used. It's number one, it's like a more fashionable style of dress that she's not accustomed to, and she's never worn heels before, and so she's trying to fight in this dress and in heels, and it's creating all these hindrances to her. You know, we already know that what she's capable of, because they've shown her fighting prior to this scene, and so to see her have to struggle within the constraints that this dress is imposing is interesting in terms of the fight choreography. And it's just kind of I don't know. It's just they just have these cool moments. Like, there's one moment where she finally kicks off the heels and she punches a guy, and she, like, puts the glove on in, like, a really stylish way. Do you know what I mean? It's just got, like, a lot of energy and just kind of, like, coolness to it that works.
Yeah, the two things I would use to describe the main characters in this movie are energy and style. They both have oodles of both.
Yeah. Yeah, because you see Charlie is jumping around everywhere. Like when he and his friends come to the house, they're, like, throwing balls at each other, and they're throwing suitcases, right? They have suitcases that they're throwing, and they're, like, scrambling around and flipping, and it feels very much like one of these old musical films where the characters are doing these things that a person wouldn't really do in real life, but it's so full of energy that it just pulls you in, and it gives you a sense of what the characters are supposed to all be about.
Yeah, man. Oh, those guys are firecrackers. As soon as they came in, it was like the movie got set on fire. Just they're fluid, and they're energetic, and they're athletic, and they're acrobatic, and it's like watching a circus performance. It really is just fantastic. And they're just a bunch of kids, like, back home from school, just screwing around. And it's again, what an amazing combination of elements. So it's one of those scenes where if you weren't into it before, and the movie is a little slow before that, but if you weren't into it before, that's one of those scenes that'll really get its hooks into you really quick. Because remember, that's the same one that immediately goes into them starting that fight in the family shrine and just all the property damage, which is, again, a visually impressive fight that I was totally unprepared for.
And then there's the whole scene where she gets the family rule book and is like, the punishment for all the things that you did is you have to be beaten with this rod like 48 times. And you can tell the father's been super lenient on him and has never done any of these things to him. And so he puts
like
these...
The book is all dusty and old.
Yeah, and he puts the books in his pants to block the impact. But the look of delight on her face when she's punishing him as she's counting the blows is priceless.
Oh, man.
But there's
as soon
also...
as I whipped out the family rule book, I thought about you and the family rules discussion that you had the other time. Yeah. I was like, oh man.
Because this is another example of that.
It's a great example, and it was really fun. It was also a really good culture versus culture thing, where you had the more lenient style of Western punishment versus the more hidebound traditional style that's literally written in the family rule book. It's great.
And it's also interesting because there's kind of like a light love story between her and Charlie in this, but it doesn't really... It's not like it necessarily goes anywhere. Do you know what I mean? You just get these odd moments where they occasionally touch hands and look at each other, or the scene at the end, which... we don't know where that's going. That
scene came out of left field. Like most of the scenes in this movie, I was completely unprepared for it. I wasn't unhappy. I was just unprepared.
So we'll talk about the last scene, because in the final moments of the film, they defeat the bad guy, and she basically says, "Well, my work here is done, so I'm not gonna be your auntie anymore. I'm gonna leave." And so then the next scene, and I think he gets slapped. He says something to her, and the father slaps him. And then it's a really good cut. Like, he gets slapped, and then we see him in the streets nursing his jaw, screaming with like a big packet of bandages around his mouth. And he's telling his friends the story of everything that happened. And as they're walking down the street, they see this blonde woman, and they're struck by her beauty, and they go over, and it turns out it's either her or somebody who looks exactly like her. And he says, "Hey, aren't you my auntie?" And she's dressed in like this new style dress, and she's got a blonde wig on, and in fact, I think it's the wig that she was wearing when she was Delina at the masquerade ball. And he says, "Hey, aren't you my auntie?" And she says, "No, my name is Susie." And so either this is an unrelated woman who just looks like her for some reason, or it's her and she's adopted an English name and is sort of started this new life where she's more open to Western style customs. But I don't know. How was your interpretation of that scene?
I interpret it that way. I feel like this is like her reward for a movie filled with difficulties and struggles and humiliation. Also, I would like to point out she does say that in English, in spoken English, which blows everybody away. Because like, she speaks English. There's a lot of English put into the dialogue in a way that I know it's going to sound weird to say it's Japanesey, but it is Japanesey, because that's a cool guy thing to do in Japan, is just sprinkle in some English in your dialogue. But it always has this really thick Japanese accent. In this case, it's a thick Chinese accent. But I always interpret that as, man, that guy is so cool. Sounds so dorky.
Well, you see that in a lot of Hong Kong movies when you watch them, and this kind of is in that spirit, I think. But I thought they did very good use of the moments that they chose to do English were carefully selected. They
were, and remember that almost no one else in the movie speaks it but him.
Yeah.
So it's a code language to almost everyone else. So like, what do you say?
Well, and it creates all these interesting situations, because there's that scene where he's talking to her and he's occasionally peppering his speech with English, and he's talking to his friends as well, and he's kind of making fun of her. And as a person who, because we understand English, it doesn't automatically register in my mind, oh, she doesn't understand what he's saying, because I just understood what he said. But the movie does a good job of reminding you which parts of what he said she doesn't understand. And
because she mentions it, which again is great. So if you are a native English speaker, or if you are like maybe a Hong Kong viewer, and that's a little more natural for you to listen to, and you're not used to that being something that's untranslatable to someone who doesn't speak English, the movie reminds you of that. It's great.
And I think it's also interesting too, because I can't remember the exact pun, and I don't know the language, so I don't know how the pun was constructed. But he basically says his name is Charlie Yu, and she interprets that to mean that he's a stinking carp. I think because there's some sort of linguistic pun going on when you place the surname in the right, because I think she says you Charlie or something. Like it's something about the positioning of the surname is I think what leads to the pun. I can't remember, and I think Kenny might have explained it to me. But
that was a pretty obvious pun. I mean, like, because again, English style names is surname first and family name after, and it's the exact opposite in China. And Charlie and Yu all are phonemes in Chinese. So, like, it's just that he basically jumbled them up so that his name translated to stinking carp, which is funny.
And so yeah, and again, I'm not 100% sure if that was the pun or not, but I know there was a pun there like that. And what I appreciated about how the movie handled it is when I first saw it as a viewer, even though I didn't understand the language, obviously, I understood that there was a pun like that taking place, and I understood what the principles were that I was supposed to be, catching, that led to the misunderstanding. So I feel like the movie does a very good job for Western viewers who maybe don't speak the language, of just kind of giving you a sense of where, of explaining the humor very quickly, I guess, is how I would put it.
That's actually a really impressive little element, too. Because you can draw a direct line of parallel between that and, like, say, Rush Hour, which is the same exact kind of humor, which I don't... That's an American movie, and so when they do the humor, I don't feel like they feel the need to explain it, and so, I don't know, I felt... it didn't feel as funny. It didn't have as strong of an impact in Rush Hour for me. But in this one, like, I was laughing at it because they do manage to not only introduce the joke and have the joke land, but then to immediately kind of explain it in this really quick way. So no matter which side of the cultural barrier you're on or whether or not you are, you get that, oh, okay, that's what happened.
Okay.
Really impressive stuff. Well constructed.
That was Chris Tucker in Rush Hour, right? That was...
Yes.
Yeah, I think he and Jackie Chan though had really good chemistry in those movies. I do remember those films. They were popular when I was taking Taekwondo, and I remember being it was like prime Jackie Chan viewing time period for me. But yeah, I think it just does a great job of explaining the humor and everything. I just never felt. Sometimes you'll watch these movies and there'll be things that you need explained to you. Do you know what I mean? You'll have to go searching for an answer. You'll be like, I did not understand what just happened there. I need to go look stuff up. And here, I never had that impulse. I always felt like I either understood it or I was so on the cusp of understanding it that I was satisfied. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's the vibe I got, which makes me wonder what I didn't understand, because there might have been something that was like a pure Chinese language or Chinese culture thing that totally went over my head.
Oh, I'm sure there were things that we would have missed. But yeah, so again, I obviously we've gone on about this movie for some length, so we both like it. And again, both these films I believe are available on Amazon Prime if you want to watch them. I do recommend picking them up too, especially My Young Auntie. I think that's one that's definitely worth having in your DVD, or I don't know if it's available on Blu-ray, but I have it on DVD, and it's a nice one to have because the DVD, number one, you can get the commentary track, which has a lot of good information in it. There's a rickshaw scene in there, and they mention how Kara Hui had appendix surgery just before performing that scene. And it makes the scene that much more impressive when, again, it's like you said, it's not the most physical of all the kung fu in the film, but still, for somebody who just had appendix surgery, it's a pretty impressive performance. So I don't know, in terms of gaming, how would you make use of this content between both the movies?
Well, the most obvious contents that came to my mind, there were two that came up with Web of Death, which is the dungeons. Remember, I watched that movie, but last week I got my hands on a copy of Wandering Heroes of Ogregate, and the week before that I got my hands on a copy of The House Paper Shadows, and the week before that I got my hands on the copy of Maze of Blue Medusa, which is back in print. So I am spoiled with kung fu and dungeons lately. So watching the scene where they're going into the tomb, I was just like, oh man, I can't wait for this week's D&D session. I'm going to put so much of the stuff in there.
You could take that tomb and just plop it right into a D&D game as it was presented without change. Yeah. I mean, I can't emphasize, and again, I know I harp on this a lot, but the reason why is because so often I just always encounter this notion that you're not supposed to. The dungeons are just not supposed to be part of wuxia for some reason, and I get why because
something that no way.
Well, no, I mean I understand why because a lot of wuxia does focus more on the character drama and all these other things that are going on. There are other elements that are maybe more that will get higher priority for certain, but I used to read a lot of fantasy books, and fantasy books, they don't have that many dungeons. Do you know what I mean? Like, not like D&D does. Do you know what I'm saying? But there's enough that you can see where the dungeon concepts come from. Do you know what I mean? And
there are enough, and there are a few that are extremely important. In my mind, the giant temple city from Red Nails, it's a Conan book. That one is extremely iconic, and so are the Mines of Moria.
I would.
Or the Rings, which is a seminal one. It's kind of like the archetypical dungeon.
And I would just say, just because you brought Conan up, you cannot find like if you are running an old style fantasy game, especially one that's got more of a Conan vibe. Like I was running something that was much more Mediterranean at one point. Conan is the best for getting ideas. Like those stories, you cannot read you read a Conan story, you're going to have an adventure pop into your head right away. Do you know what I mean? Like I that just happened to me every time I ever read Conan. And you're right. There were I think I can think of a lot of iconic moments from Conan where you have dungeons. But again, my point is the dungeons in Conan, they're not these complex Gygaxian type dungeons. Do you know what I mean? Gygaxian dungeons are things that are kind of unique to D&D for the most part, except for a handful of cases like you were pointing to. But I mean, most of the dungeons are like very limited. He goes into a chamber and there's a giant snake in there or something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. A lot of them are extremly simple. Like the one you're talking about is literally a tower with a snake in it.
Yeah.
It's not complex.
No, and the wuxia dungeons in the wuxia movies are the same sort of thing. They're functional within the setting that's been established, but they're still dungeony in that respect. So it might only be 2 to 5 rooms in some cases, but it's still a fairly, as dungeons go in media, that's pretty extensive.
Because the Gygaxian dungeon does not get a lot of media attention.
Yeah,
it's something that we as gamers are very familiar with, and I personally love dungeons. I'll do a dungeon every bloody session if I have to. The mega dungeon is a very classic kind of way of running games. But in media, you're usually not in the dungeon very long.
No.
They don't make things about dungeons very commonly.
No, and so what I would say is I feel like the ratio of dungeon to other content is roughly the same in a lot of wuxia as it is in, fantasy. I mean, I haven't quantified it, so I could be wrong. And it might vary depending on whether you're talking visual medium versus, the wuxia literature, for example. But it's present. So, I think, and Web of Death is just a very good example of you have 2 very obvious dungeons that you could design, and with a little work you could make both of them Gygaxian as hell. But one of them would at least serve as a dungeon for even the least Gygaxian of dungeon campaign. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's I guess what I would compare it to. Some of the Harn dungeons tend to be a little bit more limited in scope. Do you know what I mean? Like they used to be very good at presenting kind of like a believable tomb that had some challenges to it. Do you know what I mean? Or like a believable location that had a few interesting areas and was very interactive. And that's kind of what this site was. It's that kind of a dungeon. So you could port it directly as that, or you could just really riff on it and add 80 rooms and make it this amazing super dungeon or mega dungeon.
Also good.
Oh, is that?
I said also good.
Yeah. But the other cool thing about it is just the kinds of traps they have in movies like this are always very gameable, I find.
True, and they're gameable in a way that you can do more easily in game form than you could ever do in movie form. Like, one of the heroes goes through this dungeon alone, dodging the traps, and he just gets a spider. But how much better would it have been if he was fighting through those traps with some rivals? It's a lot easier to pull that off in a game where you don't have to worry about things like a special effects budget and injuring actors. You can do that, and your imagination has an unlimited special effects budget, so you can really like wring out some of the interesting scenarios you could do in this dungeon a lot more thoroughly in a game than you can in a movie.
Now, do you? We are a little pressed for time at this point, so do you have any other gameable thoughts?
Okay, I'm going to go with one more then. I mean, I had two more, but I'm going to go with one more because the other one was kind of weak. It was the whole family hierarchy thing from My Young Auntie, which is gameable, but I don't think there's a huge amount of word count needs to get dedicated to that. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the WMD of the martial world, that spider, and introducing something that is kind of the equivalent of a nuclear deterrent in a game. I put a lot of thought into that because my game, Tian Chang, is going to have characters that are able to blow up planets, but you don't have to go quite that far to have a character that's significantly more powerful than others or has an advantage that is powerful enough to like wipe out cities or civilizations. And like, how do you game around that whenever you have like the WMD of the Wulen? So that was another thing that struck me about that spider, because like the whole the entirety of the plot revolved around, we can't let the bad guys hit the spider. Then they got the spider, you know. And you can do that stuff in a game. And what I found in designing for the really ridiculously powerful characters is it winds up in the exact same sort of stalemate position that nuclear arms do. Is like, okay, if they have the spider that can destroy the martial world, well, I have a cursed sword that can destroy the martial world. And that's where it stays. We can't escalate beyond a certain point, or else the world blows up. So that's one of the things I found, that you can make a stable setting in the wake of what is effectively nuclear weapons.
You can also embrace the unstable setting side of it. You can, I mean, like my inclination is if I like, I have introduced weapons like this in my games before, and often players will try to seek them out, but this is the kind of scenario where I would have a lot of different people looking for this weapon, and whoever ends up with it in the end would obviously be in a very good position to control the martial world and establish kind of a new order under their authority, maybe. That might be interesting if the players lose. Do you know what I mean? That creates a whole... Not that they have to lose. Not that that should be the only outcome that you're thinking about. Just
but
that
you should be okay with any of the outcomes of that. Maybe the thing is thrown in a volcano. Maybe the players win and they get to set the rules. Maybe they lose. Also good.
And I think that would, it's a lot of fun when things get shaken up like that. I guess at one point my players did find the ultimate weapon, which was a time traveling chariot that they began to abuse considerably. But what they discovered was every time they traveled through time, I kind of did like a Torchwood thing where they were creating more and more cracks in the fabric of time itself. And so all these people from the future and the past started pouring in to the time that they lived in. I know this is very far afield from typical Wuxia, but this was a Wuxia campaign, and eventually this guy from like the far future came in through with a mech suit, and he was all arrogant and like when he was like blasting them away with his cannon, and when they eventually started talking to him, he was just a jerk. He was he would say things like, "Oh, sure, you guys love, but not like we do in my time." Like he viewed everybody that lived in this time period as like these primitive, half-evolved people, and it drove the players nuts. But that's a tangent.
I mean, like I'm going to draw a line in comparison to the WMDs that showed up in my games. At one point, the players did something extremely heroic and were rewarded with dragon eggs. And to allow them to get the most out of their dragons, I was like, okay, here's how it works. If you get them a horde, just like in My Little Pony, they'll grow bigger. Mm-hmm. So the bigger their gold horde is, the bigger the dragon is, just like a character. Well, I didn't anticipate them double dipping and bringing a bunch of gold back, getting higher level themselves, and then pouring it every dime into getting their dragons huge. So at one point we had 3 adult dragons flying around with high level characters on them, and that was basically the end of that setting.
Well, I mean, you that's when your campaign becomes a political campaign. Do you know what I mean? That's when your players become kings. You should read my well, I'll talk about it after the podcast. I don't think it's necessarily needs to be brought up here, but I have some
plug it.
No, and I have some stuff I wrote about just that, and I'll point you in that direction. But I think again, letting that top pop off like that is okay if you just think about, well, where is that actually going to take me, and you accept it. And are willing to work with it. So if the players take over the world, that could be a perfectly fine starting point for a new series of adventures that involve all of the headaches and challenges of managing the world that you've just taken over. And
but remember, because not every problem can be solved with generous application of dragon.
No. In fact, that's when you start thinking, like, again, it's in my mind because me and Adam are talking about it, but that's when you start thinking in terms of Claudius. Like, Augustus has just taken over the Roman world, and now he's got all these headaches stemming from his wife poisoning people and trying to manipulate, who's going to be his heir and all these things. You could do all kinds of fun and interesting things once the characters have taken power. And that, in fact, that sort of does bring us to square one of Web of Death. That's sort of the position that the leader of the Venom sect is in.
You're right, because he's on top of the world, and it's not a great fit for him.
No, because he if he wanted to, he could pull that weapon out. He knows where it is. Do you know what I mean? He could pull it out and kill everybody in the room. And so, but that's what he's dealing with, is all the intrigue that's going on around him as a sect leader. He's not going off on standard adventures anymore. His daughter maybe, but not him. So I think it's sort of a you can still have that, and in fact I've run campaigns where the characters have been the leaders of sects, and much of the sessions are them in the palace halls of their sect, sort of receiving people. And every once in a while, somebody comes and tries to assassinate you, or but every once in a while they would leave the sect headquarters to go off on important missions, but otherwise they would send people. Do you know what I mean? So it becomes a different kind of game, but it can still play out.
You're kind of playing Dune at that point. Nothing wrong with Dune.
But yeah, Dune's incredible. So I think we've kind of. But I do want to hear about the point about the family hierarchy, just so we can bring My Young Auntie into the mix.
Okay, because it was really cool, and the idea of being able to kind of just step into a hierarchy and have a not only like a title but almost like a rank.
Yeah,
I like that quite a bit, because you can translate that into a lot of different things. It can be in the sense of like a really traditional sort of family roles, like in Chinese family structures are really regimented and hierarchical. Like they have a lot more structure than their equivalent Western family structures, I think, in most cases. And that might not be true for, like, I guess maybe England, where there's some pretty high hierarchy to stuff. But like in China, if you compare that to, like, say, my family, oh man, totally different way of doing things. So being able to be in that like elder auntie position is something that the character can leverage towards advantage. She can make people do stuff. She can influence them, and you could do that. Like, to say you have a war going on, you could do that with the characters. Just like have them as a reward for something they do for some baron. It's like, oh, okay, you guys are all knights now. You have this rank. And suddenly, not only do they have a lot of power to do something they couldn't do before, but they're immediately kind of enmeshed in whatever's going on with this war, and they have a side because one of the sides gave them all these rewards and all this power. But then on top of that, there's the other unseen thing, which is you have a lot of responsibilities because of your newfound place in the hierarchy. Like the whole auntie character, the whole movie is about her resolving this one giant responsibility that was foisted on her.
Yeah, no,
do that to characters.
It's also useful too, just because I think just sort of having a sense of the sort of dynamic that can exist within a family structure like that is useful in a even though and again we know this isn't really like a wuxia movie, but it's useful information to bring into a wuxia campaign.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
that's important stuff, especially for a wuxia campaign. Like specifically wuxia, you really do need to have families with pretty strict rules in them, I feel like, and like pretty well defined places in a hierarchy. That really benefits because like even in absence of anything really super interesting happen, there will be drama that's generated just from that structure. It's almost custom made to make people like emotionally uncomfortable and want more and try to kind of rebel against their place or have difficulty with dealing with that. I almost want to compare it to like a paladin.
Well, no, I think it's. Yeah, no, I like to always have my players tell me like who their siblings are. I even made a generator so that we could determine it randomly if we wanted to. But I like saying like, okay, how many siblings do you have? What rank sibling are you? What about your parents? When characters don't have parents, that's usually a bad sign in a wuxia campaign.
That's a red flag.
Yeah, it's useful to know where their parents are so that eventually they can come into the mix in some way. Provided you're not doing it with the aim of screwing over the players every time. Do you know what I mean? Like you could use it as a hammer to kind of whack the players into line and go on your adventure. But I think it's better when you have family members in the mix. In a hierarchy like that, I mean, I imagine the reason that a hierarchy like that sustains so long over time is because it's useful to everybody that's in the hierarchy in some way. You get some benefit even if you're lower in the hierarchy. Do you know what I mean? And so there should be benefits to existing within a family structure like that.
It needs to be a balanced thing. You need to have it almost seems like what you want to have is a strong cast of NPCs that are not only supportive of the characters but can sometimes it sort of burden them with things. So you have a good balance there that you have there as a game element. A family is an amazing tool because it gives you like a support network, and it also gives you a plot delivery mechanism. Oh, I heard this rumor that the Wudang temple is unguarded. Bam, you just delivered some plot to your players. They can go and investigate that if they want to. And as a matter of fact, they might have to, because grandfather has a rivalry against them. And damn it, you're the only one who's capable of seeing that to its end.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it always has to be a factor. Like, obviously, there are wuxia heroes. Like, a lot of wuxia heroes are very independent, and you don't necessarily see their family or know about them. But a lot of them you do, and the whole sort of respect for the parents is very significant part of the setting. There's sort of this Confucius underlying to it. So so I think that it's helpful. And I think again it's obviously a much later period, so you have to keep that in mind. But it's still just kind of a good example. I would say between that and between Temple of the Red Lotus, you get some good ideas that you might be able to port into a game, just in terms of dealing with family dynamics in a setting like this. And so yeah, but also I think with My Young Auntie, there are the traps.
Oh yeah,
and the traps were something that you could easily bring, because trap dungeons are very common. Like, you're walking down a hallway, you do trap. But this was kind of neat because this is sort of a trap where you don't necessarily expect to see a trap unless you know that one's there. Like, you're just going to somebody's house. You don't necessarily expect there to be a trap in the garden on the way in or in the trees. Do you know what I mean? And so I will oftentimes have the shrubs around locations be trapped with poisonous darts and things. That's a favorite little trick of mine.
You're a mean GM, aren't you?
No, I'm not a mean GM, but like, here's the thing: like, when players go into a dungeon, they know that there might be traps there. That's when they pull out the 10-foot pole. Do you know what I mean? Like, and you can't be unless you're like sort of pushing some kind of artificial restraint on them. You really can't blame PCs for when it becomes clear that traps are present, for them to start taking extreme measures to avoid traps. Now, you could,
that's the point of traps in a lot of ways, is slow them down so they're in the dungeon longer.
Yeah. Now there could be a time pressure that sort of forces them to more carelessly go through a dungeon. But I mean,
monsters.
but if you put traps where people aren't expecting them to be, if it's zest. It's a little bit of flavor that can add to your campaign. I'm not saying put them in like the pantry of the characters' homes, or like they walk into an inn and they sit down and they get impaled with a spike trap. I'm just saying, maybe they go to talk to like a shady guy and it turns out he's got traps in his lawn, things like that, or they go to investigate somebody or sneak into their home and the guy's got stuff to protect, so he's got traps in the perimeter, that sort of thing. But anyways, we are coming up on the limit. I was only supposed to do this for half an hour because I have a doctor's appointment to go to. But
I wasn't trying to make you talk more at this time. I promise. It's really interesting movies.
But we will go. And again, I do have to say, like, My Young Auntie is. I think Joel and I both had the same kind of sentiment walking into this movie. When I first saw this film, I had bought it on DVD. And I was reluctant to watch it because something about the cover, it just looked like I could tell like this was a movie people liked and I'd heard about it, but I just the cover didn't like make me really want to watch the movie. It looks
like it's going to be boring. It really does. It looks like it's going to be some kind of like plotting, dramatic thing. Nope, totally the opposite of that. And
I started it and like within moments I was just like, I don't know what it is about this movie, but I am loving this experience. And
it didn't come alive for me until after the rickshaw scene.
I can understand that. I can understand that. Because the rickshaw scene is the first real demonstration of martial arts in the movie, too. So that's like the, I think there's the beginning, too, when Lau Kar Leung is doing the form. But...
Yeah. Wait, was that before the rickshaw scene, was it?
I think that was the start. Yeah, that was... Because that's before he goes to meet her.
That was the transition between the rickshaw scene before we got introduced to the son character. I don't remember now.
I'm pretty sure that happens right after her flashback before the rickshaw scene, or possibly even at the very beginning of the movie.
I gotta watch it again, which I'm not complaining about.
No, because the beginning is the boat. They start out in the boat, and then she has a flashback, and then I think they do the form, and then after the form, he goes to meet her at the docks. And then they have the rickshaw scene, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you got that.
But
there's even that scene is pretty, like, it's just a guy practicing martial arts alone in his house.
That is one of the best physical performances of a form I've ever seen in my life. Like, there's a few that really stand out. Another favorite of mine, not just because it's so captivating the way it's done, is in Snake in the Eagle's Shadow. He sort of it's a Jackie Chan movie, so it's not a Shaw Brothers, but it starts out with a similar type of opening where they have him doing like a form to like some odd music. And he's doing, I think he's doing like Snake style, and it just looks really cool on screen. And so I don't know. Those are very fun to watch, and when they're done well, they're beautiful. And so I don't know a lot about kung fu forms. I've had to do forms in other styles, and it's a demonstration, and it's like an enactment of all of these important stances and techniques within a style, and there's usually a series of them that you have to do. So like when I was doing Taekwondo, there was like every belt level had its own forms that you had to learn, and I really when they're done well, I love watching them. And
I studied Tai Chi Chuan, and like it's the same thing where it's just one continual moving form. And there are a surprising amount of rules to them. Like you can't speed up or slow down. The way you hold your body and when you breathe and where your weight is on your feet, it's all extremely important. I'm sure you had. If you're doing Taekwondo, I'm sure that you had like similar rules to the way you could do a form and the way you had to move your body and things like that.
It's a side discussion, but the interesting thing about Taekwondo is how old-fashioned the forms were and how not old-fashioned a lot of the other stuff was that we did. But the forms were very low stance. So they were hard to do, but they didn't. Something about the form he was doing in this movie. That's the kind of form, like when I was doing Taekwondo forms, I would be envious when I would see a form like the one he's doing, because there was a lot of grace. And the Taekwondo form, there's a lot of grace to them, but they're kind of more focused on power and low stances. But I think that it's interesting, the Tai Chi thing, because I want to. Do you happen to know how many forms there were in the style that you were learning, or?
I was doing the truncated one where there were 60 forms. There's actually supposed to be 120, which is a lot of them are just the same thing over again. Like I repeated. What was the one? They have some of them have really poetic names, some of them have really specific names. Like there's this one where you kind of hook your right arm back, and even in the forms that I did, you would repeat that like 7 times through the 60s. They weren't all unique moves.
Well, I mean, if I ever did martial arts again, that would probably be the only one I'd be capable of doing, just because I'm just too frail now to do anything that require. Not that Tai Chi is for frail people, just that it's a more.
Don't insult a Tai Chi master; they'll kick your ass.
Yeah, no, I know, I'm aware, but you know what I'm talking about. Like I feel like I could handle a Tai Chi form.
I mean, Bruce Lee himself, his father did Tai Chi Chuan, and he saw it as, and he classically called it a kung fu for old men because he wound up doing dragon style.
Okay, there's you know who teaches Tai Chi here is Donnie Yen's mother. Like literally, I could drive into Boston, and I could take Tai Chi with Donnie Yen's. I don't know if she actually teaches the classes, but her school is there, and she's apparently like an amazing Tai Chi master. So, again, the drive to Boston here is excruciating, but what I'm saying is it's a thing that's available locally that I've thought about, and so I'm very curious about the forms. But I think when you say forms, people might not understand like a one form. You said how many forms did you say? 100 and something?
120, yeah.
120. So a form in most styles is a fairly extended sequence of movements that you have to memorize.
Yes.
So it's not just like, oh, I'm moving my arm to the left and the right, and that's what. No. It's like a dance number in martial arts almost, like a little bit more regimented.
Every part of your body, you shift your weight, change your orientation. Like they're very specific and complicated. Yeah,
and so to have to memorize 120 is I think when I was doing Taekwondo, I don't know. I don't think we did more than 20. That's for sure. It was a fairly small number, but it felt like memorizing the Bible. Do you know what I mean? Because your whole body has to memorize it.
The point of the form, and this will wind up happening as you learn them, and I'm sure you went through this too, is that you do eventually internalize it, so that you're not thinking about it and you're just going through the movements kind of subconsciously, and that's the moment when you're kind of reaching into real mastery of the form and the underlying maneuver and like how you're supposed to act instinctually in fighting. So that kind of pays dividends whenever you actually get into sparring.
Well, and with Tai Chi, and I think with most, because I have gone to like I did do Sanshou for a while, and I didn't really master any of the forms they taught there, but I had to try to learn them. And I went to a couple of kung fu schools when I was in between styles at one point. And the thing that I always noticed about the forms in Chinese styles is how subtle they are. Like in Taekwondo, the form is very obvious. Do you know what I mean? Like with a few exceptions, there were a couple of forms that did some subtle things. But I found that most of the forms in that style, and it seems like a lot of the kata and karate are fairly obvious in nature. But kung fu, whenever somebody would try to teach me kung fu, there'd be parts of my body that needed to be in a position that I wouldn't normally think about in another martial arts style. Do you know what I mean? Like it just felt like a much more I don't know. There was more complexity to the posturing, is how I would put it.
There is, and beyond that, like especially in Tai Chi, I don't know. I can't speak for every form, but in Tai Chi, it's an internal style, so it's kind of wed to a bunch of Taoist Chi theory. And in that, you can't ever like sharply bend any joint. So every one of the joints on your body at all times had to be not straight and rigid and not sharply bent. So there's this kind of convex smoothness to it at all points in every movement through 120 movements.
Okay. Well,
so there's a lot of subtlety and specificity to it.
I got to go soon, but I have a pretty good story about forms that I probably should relate here.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
So as you know, like when you do belt testings and styles, like a lot of times you have to do the form. You'll have to sometimes spar. You'll have to do like one steps, and you'll have to do like in Taekwondo there were a series of steps that led like 100 moves that you have to do that are just like all the moves in Taekwondo or something. And I remember I went out drinking the night before one of my belt tests because I always did so well up to that point that I was super confident, and I I still was a little bit hungover when the belt testing was on the next day, and I couldn't remember my form. I would do, and it was a form that I should have known. It wasn't even like the form for that belt. It was the form that I was supposed to already have that I had mastered, that was preceded the form for that belt. Do you know what I mean? And I couldn't do it. And eventually I got it, but it took me like basically it was like a 3 strikes, and you're like, if you screw up 3 times during the belt test, you don't get the belt. And I screwed up, I think, twice. And I had like one more mistake, and I managed to. I got by in the skin of my teeth, and I got rebuked by the master too. I was told very clearly that I had not done things correctly. So
that's a really good story.
Yeah, it was. I had like a date the night before, basically, and I indulged too heavily at a place called Rockefeller's in Salem. And so anyways, I have to go to a doctor's appointment, so we're going to head out. I know we got sidetracked on all this form stuff. I thought that was kind of interesting. I was really enjoying the discussion about forms. And it's funny, I always forget that you did Tai Chi because you're so, like, humble about this. Like, you never bring it up. And so it's like I'll be talking, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I actually know about Tai Chi," but like, so it's I appreciate you bringing that information into the podcast. So anyways, I don't know what we're going to be doing next. I think we were talking about possibly doing a Chinese ghost story, if we can swing that, because everybody would need a copy of the movie for that to work, and it's not one that's easily available on streaming services.
I've got a little money tucked away in my Amazon account, specifically in case I needed to grab something for this podcast. I'm so enjoying it. I really am. Another thing that we were talking about was talking to David Ramirez. Like, he expressed a deep interest in jumping on here with us.
Well, and Adam was interested in jumping on too, so I was thinking we might get the whole, him and Adam. Yeah. Well, particularly, I was thinking for a Chinese ghost story that might be good, because when we did a Chinese ghost story in Wuxia Weekend, he wasn't able to watch it because he couldn't get access to it, and so if that can be remedied, then he'd get an opportunity to let us know what he thought of the film, which would be interesting, because normally I'm not too. I don't care if somebody can't make it and they can't see the movie. I never revisit the issue, but I really wanted to know Adam's opinion about a Chinese ghost story, and so because he has an interesting perspective on movies and stuff, and it was a film that I really wanted his opinion on. So I think if we could get him in, and I'm really curious about your reaction to it too, because it's not like a lot of the other movies that we've watched. And so I'd be curious how you feel about that film.
Like unusual things.
Well, I don't want to prejudice you against the movie by planting thoughts in your head.
I want to go into it like really raw. But I like unusual stuff just in general. Like, I'm the kind of guy that watches David Lynch. So
okay.
I like stuff that challenges me and isn't something that I'm familiar with. And boy, that's pretty much why I'm doing this podcast for today.
Yeah, this will have some challenging moments for sure. It's a classic movie, though. It's a very classic film. And it stars Joey Wong and Wu Ma and Leslie Chung, who we saw in Bride with White Hair. In fact, he plays a very similar type of kid. Well, no. He doesn't play. He plays a scholar in this one, but he's in it's a romantic type of role, just like Bride with White Hair was. So I'm rambling. We're gonna go, and I'm gonna go to my appointment, and we will be back on hopefully within the next couple of weeks. I'm gonna be back on with Adam with another discussion of I, Claudius, and then we're gonna be doing the new Doctor Who series when that airs on Sunday. And so we'll it's a new showrunner, new Doctor, so it should be interesting discussion. And on Wuxia Weekend, we're gonna be doing Black Magic. Which I'm really looking forward to. Black Magic, and Joel, just so you know, Black Magic is available streaming on Prime, so if you want to watch it, you can feel free. It's not a wuxia movie. It's a Shaw Brothers sort of 70s Black Magic film, which is very difficult to describe in the amount of time I have here. But they're a lot of fun. They're perfectly suited for Halloween. And all right, so until next episode, we will talk to you later.